Let's bring in Rebecca Roiphe. She's a CBSN legal contributor and a former assistant district attorney in New York County. Rebecca, we've been talking about this issue of a correction. In Robert Mueller's opening statement to the House Intelligence Committee in the afternoon, he issued a correction to his testimony from earlier with the House Judiciary Committee. Let's go ahead and listen to some of that.
So to recap what we've heard, we have heard today that the president ordered former White House counsel Don McGahn to fire you. The president ordered Don McGahn to then cover that up and create a false paper trail. And now we've heard the president ordered Corey Lewandowski to tell Jeff Sessions to limit your investigation so that you stop investigating the president. I believe a reasonable person looking at these facts could conclude that all three elements of the crime of obstruction of justice have been met. And I'd like to ask you, the reason, again, that you did not indict Donald Trump is because of OLC opinion stating that you cannot indict a sitting president, correct?
That is correct. Now, before we go to questions, I want to add one correction to my testimony this morning. I want to go back to one thing that was said this morning by Mr. Liu, who said, and I quote, "You didn't charge the president because of the OLC opinion." That is not the correct way to say it. As we say in the report, and as I said at the opening, we did not reach a determination as to whether the president committed a crime.
All right, so Rebecca, we heard there the earlier exchange between Congressman Ted Lieu and Robert Mueller, and then we heard Robert Mueller issue that correction. Explain for us what the Office of Legal Counsel guidance was and why Bob Mueller felt he needed to clarify it.
Okay, so the Office of Legal Counsel has written an opinion saying a sitting president cannot be indicted for various reasons. That's not the constitutional mechanism for holding the president accountable. So in that first exchange, it was actually clever of Ted Lieu because he juxtaposed two questions. And because of that juxtaposition, it sounded as if Mueller was saying, yes, I believe this was obstruction of justice. In a normal situation, I would have charged it. But I couldn't because of this OLC opinion. Mm-hmm. In his correction, he's very careful because he doesn't say, I don't think that. He says we didn't reach a conclusion.
Which is a different thing.
And he had to do it because he promised before these hearings to keep to the four corners of the report. So what he did was he then went back to what he said in the report and reiterated it. So, you know, you can take what you want from that, but obviously somebody told him this could be interpreted as going beyond what you said in the report and actually opining on the criminal, whether or not the president committed a crime.
And just to be clear on this point that Paula went back and forth with the president on, can a president, in fact, upon leaving office, be charged?
Yeah, so that same OLC opinion says yes, because part of the reason or the central reason why is we don't want to hobble the presidency. We don't want to make it so a sitting president can't actually do his job. It's important that we have a functioning presidency. So the opinion is based on that, along with some other constitutional provisions. So once he's no longer president, we don't have that concern anymore. So if there's criminal conduct and the statute of limitations hasn't run, then a prosecutor, a regular prosecutor, a U.S. attorney could charge that conduct.
So Mueller was also asked why he decided not to subpoena the president. Here is how Mueller responded to that.
Why didn't you subpoena the president?
Well, at the outset, after we took over and initiated the investigation.
If I could ask you to speak on the microphone.
Yeah, of course. At the outset, after we took over the investigation and began it and pursued it, quite obviously one of the things we anticipated wanting to accomplish, that is having the interview of the president. We negotiated with him for a little over a year, and I think what you adverted to in the appendix lays out our expectations as a result of those negotiations. But finally, when we were almost towards the end of our investigation and we'd had little success in pushing to get the interview of the president, we decided that we did not want to exercise the subpoena powers because of the necessity of expediting the end of the investigation.
Was that, excuse me, did you want
I was going to say the expectation was if we did subpoena the president, he would fight the subpoena and we would be in the midst of the investigation for a substantial period of time.
So, Rebecca, just to be clear, what I heard the former special counsel say there, that it was not necessarily a question of whether or not they could win a subpoena fight. It was a question of how long it might take.
Right. I mean, the law is somewhat unsettled, but most people agree that if it were to have gone through the courts, at least with the precedent that we have on the books, likely Mueller would have won, but it would have taken quite some time, and that would have delayed the report and the conclusion. And I hear Mueller saying, well, that's important enough for me. I have to weigh the public interest in actually accessing this information that we've gathered over these 2 years and how delayed it would have been if we had gone through this fight.
So we were talking a little bit ago off camera about how clearly there were different agendas here when it came to this testimony and these hearings. You had Republicans setting out to do one thing, you had Democrats setting out to do another, and Robert Mueller setting out to do yet another thing. Just give us your assessment as a former prosecutor of what we saw from Robert Mueller. Clearly, he is a man who chooses his words quite carefully.
Yes, I mean, and this was a particular, sometimes he just refused to answer as a way of choosing his words carefully. But I think he had two things in mind. One was to maintain neutrality. He succeeded. Whatever you think, Donald Trump might think that was a poor performance. My guess is Mueller leaves there thinking, I did great, because all he wants to do is come off. I'm not helping the Democrats. I'm not helping the Republicans. I just got my facts out there.
He doesn't want to get involved in
I
any of
don't
that,
want to get involved. And seeming sort of reticent and a little bit, not willing to, on either side. Every side is trying to get stuff out of him, and he's not being particularly cooperative. That just makes him look like he's neutral. Nonpartisan. And I think he came off 100% looking like that. The other thing that was, I think, clearly, and it really came out at the end, part of his agenda was to let the American public know how actually serious this Russian assault on our institutions was and why and what it undermines. And so that part, he became animated. I mean, right at the end there, animated. When he said, this, I would be so devastated if this were the new normal. If candidates everywhere were happy, welcoming, encouraging of this kind of attempt by a foreign government, then our democracy might fail. And so emphasizing how the import of it was, that was his moment, to me, the most important thing. Basically saying, I don't care. It's not my job to tell you what to do with this information, but I am telling you how grave this situation is and that we need, as a country, to address it. Democrats, Republicans, everybody.
Right, a threat to the heart of our democracy.
A threat to the heart of our democracy, yeah.
So also in Robert Mueller's report, he explains that to charge someone with obstruction of justice, 3 elements must be established. We saw a little bit of that in that exchange with Congressman Liu. But in today's hearing, Representative Hakeem Jeffries tried to walk through that 3-pronged approach. Let's listen to some of that.
The investigation found substantial evidence that when the president ordered Don McGahn to fire the special counsel and then lie about it, Donald Trump, 1, committed an obstructive act, 2, connected to an official proceeding, 3, did so with corrupt intent. Those are the elements of obstruction of justice. This is the United States of America. No one is above the law. No one. The president must be held accountable one way or the other.
Let me just say, if I might, I don't subscribe necessarily to your the way you analyze that. I'm not saying it's out of the ballpark, but I'm not supportive of that analytical charge.
So, Rebecca, help us understand the special counsel's response there.
So, again, what he is saying relates back to what we were speaking about earlier, which is he made a commitment in that report not to give a conclusion about whether or not this president committed a crime. He was not letting himself get backed into a corner by these Democrats to say, yeah, that's criminal conduct, because then he would be saying something different than what he said in that report. So he didn't do that. And that's why he said, he didn't say, I'm disagreeing with you. He said, I don't necessarily agree. It's not out of the ballpark, but I'm not necessarily agreeing, because he has to say that in order to keep his promise not to offer an opinion on whether or not the president committed a crime.
All right, Rebecca Roiphe. Rebecca, thank you so much for your
pleasure.
analysis.
Yeah.